It's Johnny Two-Face here, back with another reaction video. This time I'm reacting to Byzantine Empire Strikes Back, Battle of Nikiou. I'm sorry if I butchered that. 646, and this is by Kings and Generals, part of the early Muslim expansion documentary. And if you haven't seen my reactions to the other episodes in this series, I suggest you check them out before checking this one out. And the usual disclaimer: when I react to anything historical, if I don't show so much what is considered a proper reaction, it is probably obvious I don't know much about the subject at hand, and if I do know anything, I'll most likely pause the video to give my input or ask any curious questions, which hopefully will be answered in the comments. So the link to the original video will be in the description down below. Please go and subscribe to Kings and Generals, another great history channel here on YouTube, and captions on, full screen. And let's get this up here, and let's see how this episode turns out.
The Muslim victory of victories at Nahavand in 642 finally broke the back of the Sassanid Empire and rendered its domains west of the Zagros barrier all but defenseless to annexation into the Caliphate. Unbeknownst to the Caliph, this climactic clash...
Sorry to pause the zoom, but I need to pee. Sorry about that, let's continue.
Was also to have unexpected consequences for him personally.
Sorry.
To annexation into the Caliphate.
Yeah.
Unbeknownst to the Caliph, this climactic clash was also to have unexpected consequences for him personally. Another unexpected curveball was thrown at the ascending Islamic world, and particularly one of its most recent acquisitions, Egypt, by the Byzantines, newly emerged from a period of internal post-Heraclean division. It would forcibly bring the Nile's Arab conqueror, Amr ibn Alas, back to the forefront of world events. Welcome to the penultimate video in our second season on the early Muslim expansion, the dawning of a new age in Rashidun history, a long overdue attempted Roman counterattack, and the Battle of Nikiou. Today's video is brought to you by Ground News. In today's world of online news and social media, seeing the full picture and staying informed is difficult. So Ground News has taken a different approach in order to improve the media support.
Feel free to check that out if you're interested.
In late 643, shortly after Amr returned from his expedition against the so-called Pentapolis, the Egyptian governor travelled back to Medina in order to meet with Umar, with whom he already had a somewhat tense relationship. Mistrusted by the Caliph, Amr received a frosty reception from the very start. The tension between the two men wasn't helped by the fact that Umar, who always kept a close eye on his governors via an internal spy network, suspected Amr of unjustly appropriating Egypt's wealth. So, when the latter returned to his province, the Caliph dispatched a trusted inspector, Muhammad bin Maslama, to appraise Amr's assets. The latter produced an account of his assets, and he was found guilty of taking too much.
Wow.
The excess was confiscated and taken back to Medina. That wasn't the end of the Caliph's incessant prodding. A short while thereafter, unsatisfied at the lackluster revenues flowing into the treasury from Egypt, Umar had a heated debate with Amr by letter. After that ended in a deadlock, a Copt was sent to Medina to inform the Caliph of his province's financial situation. He bluntly informed Umar that previous rulers of Egypt had seen to the land's prosperity before taking anything from it, while Muslim governors only extracted. In response, Umar carved Egypt into two separate administrative districts during late 644, giving Amr Lower Egypt to govern from Fustat, while Upper Egypt would be ruled from Fayum by Abdullah ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Sa', the foster brother of Uthman. Predictably, Amr was once again infuriated at this deliberate diminishing of his authority. Back in Medina, a deadly plot had formed, centering around Hormuzan, who had converted to Islam and used his vast experience in Sassanid administration and governance to become one of Umar's key advisors. Despite this, the Persian noble never forgot the injury done to his home. It seems that Hormuzan made contact with Firuz, a Sassanid soldier who was enslaved after Qadisiyah or Nahavand and brought to the Caliphate's capital. And in November of 644, Firuz knifed Umar.
Wow.
Before passing away 3 days after, the second caliph appointed a shura, or council of 6 men, to appoint his successor from among their ranks. After deep debate, they decided that Uthman would become the third Rashidun caliph. It is worth noting that while Sunni Islam views Uthman as one of the rightly guided caliphs, Shia Muslims believe this election should not have occurred at all, and Ali was to be the next in line.
Politics.
Shortly after, Amr ibn al-As visited Uthman in order to lobby for his Upper Egyptian colleague's removal. The new caliph refused outright, prompting him to declare that he wouldn't return to Egypt until Abdullah ibn Sa'd was removed. In response to this threat, Uthman appointed his foster brother governor of all Egypt, further deepening the dispute between the two men. The Romans in Egypt were not happy with Amr's policies, but Abdullah's attempts to increase the incomes from the province were even less popular. Alexandria in particular bore the brunt of this new lust for revenue, leading its notoriously riotous population to undertake drastic measures. A group of prominent Romans dispatched messages to the new emperor, Constans II. These letters outlined the outrages of Muslim rule and its jizya tax, but also pointed out that Abdullah had let the Nile realm's defense slip into a pitiful state, and the city was only garrisoned by a paltry 1,000 men and could be easily taken. Perceiving an opportunity to regain control of Egypt and remedy the wound which its loss had dealt to his empire and his pride, Constans began secretly amassing a great strike force of 300 ships and many thousands of soldiers, command of which he bestowed on a eunuch known as Manuel. Constance's fleet was ready after almost a year. Because the reduced Byzantine Empire was still the dominant naval power in the Mediterranean, the Caliphate having not yet developed any seaborne capacity, there was nothing to stop this fleet from unexpectedly sailing straight into the harbour at Alexandria in early 646. As the Roman sympathizers predicted, the 1,000-strong Muslim garrison was no adequate defense against this shock assault from the sea. When Roman forces landed almost unopposed, Alexandria's population simultaneously rose up against the occupying Arabs. Most of the city's garrison was slain in the brief clash that followed. However, while the invasion army began ravaging the vicinity around Alexandria, some of the Muslims that escaped travelled to Fustat and informed the governor what was happening. Abdullah ibn Sa'd didn't even have a chance to react. Lacking confidence in their new viceroy's martial ability, the Muslims of Egypt sent a delegation to Caliph Uthman, urging him to send Amr back so that he could put an end to the crisis. Understanding that Amr was both a man of formidable military talent and feared by the Romans, Uthman bit his tongue and asked Amr to take his post back. Wasting no time, the man who had conquered the Romans once before travelled to Fustat as quickly as possible with the aim of emulating his previous achievement. Upon his arrival, the morale of Islam's warriors was boosted significantly, and they prepared for war eagerly, while Amr started planning. Informed by spies and agents that the Romans were advancing leisurely from Alexandria to Fustat, many of Amr's brash officers pressed for their commander to attack and confine the enemy to the treacherous Mediterranean metropolis before all Egypt revolted against the Muslim regime. Amr did not agree with this appraisal, as he believed that this advance would stretch Roman supply and communication lines to the limit. Manuel and his army marched under the close observation of Amr's informants, who constantly reported the Romans' position and strength. the land forces made their way up the eastern bank of the Nile, accompanied by a large flotilla of supporting warships sailing parallel to them on the river itself. Byzantine indiscipline began causing problems almost immediately. Roman soldiers moved from town to town, and the population was not happy with their behavior. When Manuel neared the halfway point between Alexandria and Fustat, Amr began a countermarch with 15,000 warriors of his own, moving on a direct collision course with the Romans. Both armies finally came into contact with one another near a large town known as Nikiou or Nakios. After resting for the night in their respective camps, the Romans and Muslims deployed on the cultivated, featureless and flat terrain just south of Nikiou. Amr's left, a cavalry regiment under the command of Sharik bin Sumay, rested on the Nile River, as did the Roman right. In addition to their organization in neat formations, a large number of Roman archers also embarked on the riverine ships. Once his preparations for battle were complete, Manuel ordered the Byzantine ground forces into effective bow range before coming to a halt and unleashing a destructive barrage of arrows against the Muslim position. On the river, Manuel had prepared a clever stratagem. His ships continued sailing until they passed by Amr's flank, at which point their onboard archers struck the Muslims in the flank as well. Amr's men had already been struggling to deal with the frontal volley, and so suffered terribly from the multi-directional bombardment. Sumay's regiment in particular was almost totally decimated, having been positioned closest to the river, but even Amr had a horse shot out from under him. Despite this punishment, however, the Muslims were unwilling to surrender the battlefield, and so endured the storm with considerable tenacity. Once Manuel believed that his enemy was sufficiently weakened, he called back the flanking vessels and had their onboard troops fall into ranks behind the main army, and then began yet another arrow attack against the Muslim line. The moment after the Byzantine eunuch general ordered a halt to his preliminary barrage, he directed his infantry to advance into spear and sword range. Although early Muslim armies were generally portrayed as being most comfortable in this kind of close quarters engagement, the Roman soldiers nevertheless impacted Amr's battered host with considerable ferocity, cracking their already faltering line. Sumay's regiment, which had endured the brunt of Manuel's seaborne missile attack, actually did break and run.
Wow.
Amr hastily pulled the remainder of his men away from the Romans' attack and halted only a short distance away in order to regroup as best he could.
And I'm guessing basically to not be surrounded by the Byzantines, because if the cavalry managed to outflank them by the river and come behind, they could outflank Amr's position.
However, Manuel, believing that the Muslims were already beaten, did not advance and finish his enemy off, instead simply waiting where he was. After a brief, eerie pause in the fighting, a magnificently dressed Roman champion, clad in gold-studded armor, rode out into the open space between the two armies and challenged the Muslims to single combat. This would give the latter time to take a breath, reform, and reorganize. So, one of Amr's favoured Mubarizan, an Arab known as Hormuz, accepted the Roman offer and strode out to meet the enemy fighter. With the remainder of both armies bearing witness, their respective champions initially clashed with spears, and neither combatant was able to score a decisive blow. Dropping their polearms after a certain amount of time had gone by, the champions clashed with sword and shield, but again neither warrior could get an edge over the other.
Sorry, I just love how they're doing these graphics. Sorry, I haven't mentioned it in any... I don't think I've ever mentioned it in any of the videos. But the graphics for the single combat are amazing, or any of the combat is amazing.
This continued until the larger Roman duelist managed to disarm and severely wound Hormuz with a series of fierce thrusts.
Wow.
As the hulking Roman was about to finish Hormuz off, the Arab champion unsheathed his short dagger and plunged it into his unsuspecting counterpart's throat with prodigious speed. Although Hormel managed to win the duel by the skin of his teeth, he died of his wounds a few days later, much to Amma's sorrow. This tradition...
That's the only problem being heavily armoured. You sacrifice a lot of your speed unless you are superhumanly strong. Or exceedingly strong was probably the better word for it, but still.
Single combat had given the Muslim general time to get his army back in order, and by the time Hormel had won, Amma was ready. Sumay's routed regiment even returned to the battlefield and formed up. When the whole Muslim army was ready, they charged and engaged in a grinding melee with Manuel's forces, combat which they were far better suited to. After a few hours of Roman resistance, the eunuch soldiers broke and ran, pursued and hunted all the way to Alexandria. Amma brought up a number of catapults and launched boulders at the recalcitrant city, whose own artillerists fired back. The defences nevertheless held firm under such bombardment, until one of the gatekeepers, Ibn Basana, offered to let Amma's troops inside if he, his family and property were retained, terms which the Muslim commander found agreeable. Therefore, at some point in the middle of 646, Alexandria's gates were opened and the Islamic army poured inside. Any Roman unit opposing the incursion was swiftly dealt with, and even those coming up to reinforce the breach were pushed away. As the rebellious city began falling victim to a sacking, the surviving imperial soldiers withdrew to their ships and sailed away. Before the vengeful Arabs could truly wreak havoc on the ancient Mediterranean metropolis and its vanquished inhabitants, an unknown Muslim approached Amma and beseeched him to stop the violence. Although the conqueror of Egypt was by no means a merciful man by nature, his kinsman's words had such an impact that Amma immediately ordered the cessation of hostilities. In the aftermath of the second siege of Alexandria, Amma ripped down the walls and made the city, in his words, like the house of an adulteress, accessible from all sides. The neglect of Egypt's defense was also remedied with the new division of its Muslim garrison into 4 parts, 2 in Fustat and 1 each in Alexandria and on the northern coast, to be moved around where necessary. It would also be rotated and the troops replaced every 6 months. Not only had Amma ibn Alas both conquered and reconquered Egypt in difficult circumstances, he had built the foundations of a rule that would secure Muslim hegemony over the fruitful country. For this, Amma well expected to be rewarded by Uthman, but he was to be disappointed. Uthman wanted his tax fiend of a brother to occupy the plum position, but was aware that Amma probably deserved some reward for his deeds. So, summoning the conqueror to his place of residence, Uthman inquired if he would like to remain in military command of Egypt, while Abdullah ibn Sa'd managed civilian administration. Amma responded with the witty barb, "In that case I would be like the man holding the horns of the cow while another milks it." For the remainder of Uthman's caliphate, Amma would bear a potent grudge and even oppose him publicly. This mutual resentment was to have serious consequences for Islamic history in the near future. The second season of our series on the early Muslim expansion will conclude next time with coverage of the Battle of Sufetullah, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be
And that'll do it. This has been another good episode by Kings and Generals, so not much I can add to that. So if you like this reaction, please like, comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.